welcome back to the texturing part of our tutorial. I'm using Substance Painter 1.5.7 at that point, and the first thing is to create a new project here in which we select our low poly mesh, the FBX. Gonna put the document resolution to 2K, and that is not to be confused with the actual maps that we're going to bake out as a next thing. This just stands for our display resolution here in the viewport. So I'm going to confirm that. And now would be a good time to already save our scene. So I'll go ahead here and save it in the same folder where I exported our high and low poly to earlier. MK2 grenade. And now it's time to add our high poly. And for that, we have to go here under texture set settings. And as you can see, if we drag this little guy here down, it reveals that all these different map slots here are basically waiting to be filled with something. And at the moment, there's nothing here yet because we haven't actually baked. So before I'm gonna go ahead here with the bake, there's just one thing. I want to add ambient occlusion as an additional map that I have to confirm here. I'm gonna say okay to that. And that's something that we gonna export out later for our in-game use or for Marmoset. So it's good to have an extra AO slot added here. And now it would be time to bring up the baking dialog here, which is really cool because it comes with some features such as the common parameters, which means that whatever we put in here is going to apply to all these different maps as well. So we don't have to put them multiple times. And I want to put the output resolution here to 4K. That is our final resolution. And that is of course not reasonable for a small grenade like that if you would want to add that to a game or something. But since we have a texture tutorial here, I'm gonna just go ahead with a maximum resolution for it. So as a next thing, I want to put the frontal and the rear distance to 15. I already made a test bake earlier, so I know that these settings work the best here. And as for average normals, I want to uncheck that. Under match, we're gonna put by mesh name, which enables Painter to bake our textures based on the naming convention that we put earlier in Max. So that's basically that nice feature that I was talking about earlier. And anti-aliasing, I want to put it to 8x8. And I almost forgot the most important thing here. We want to load our high poly mesh as well. And let's put the OBJ in there. As for our other maps here, the world space is okay. That's just taking the normal map and converts it. And for our ID map, the individual settings that we still have to change are the color source, which we want to have to mesh ID, and the color generator, I want to have it to random. And as for AO, the only thing we need to change is the self-occlusion to also recognize the individual naming convention we put. Curvature is okay as it is, and same for position. And the thickness here also has some individual settings which are almost like the AO. So I'm also gonna put that to same mesh name. And now it's time to bake. Since I put anti-aliasing to 8x8, it's gonna take quite a while to bake out. So if you wanna be faster than that, you can also put it to 2x2 and it will still look good. But in order to have the maximum available quality, I'm just going to go ahead with 8x8 here. So I'll see you as soon as that's done here. And it looks like Substance Painter baked everything properly. Usually at that point, it's a good idea to check that there are no errors on our normal map, that everything looks fine. And if there is anything, then usually it's just a matter of fixing the high poly mesh, or maybe also the low poly has some issues with the smoothing groups. But in case of that grenade here, there are not really a whole lot of elements on it to begin with, and everything here is good to go. As you can also see, Substance Painter already filled all the baked textures here into the slots that they are supposed to be going to. And that makes it really easy for us to just go ahead and concentrate on the actual texturing, which by the way resembles Photoshop in a lot of ways. So if you are familiar with the layer stack manager in Photoshop, you will hopefully find it very easy to also understand how Substance Painter works and how we build our layer hierarchy. And before we go ahead and start texturing our grenade one-to-one based on the reference images, let me just talk about the different kinds of ways to approach that, and specifically here the difference between materials and smart materials. So first things first, if you have a new project, you will see that Substance Painter already puts a blank layer on top here, and you can always create more by hitting that button here. And what exactly this layer means is that it's waiting for material information to be painted onto, and we can do this by changing our paint properties here, which by default don't have anything in it other than white information. And if we select any of these materials here, it will then fill with different channel informations already, such as the height and the roughness and the color, which then means that if we go ahead and paint, we paint with all these channels at the same time, so we don't have to do the work 4 times individually. So that would be one way of working, to just paint all that information here individually. But usually that's not very straightforward. So what I prefer to do is, first of all, deleting that layer here. And I like to work with the fill layers a whole lot. So what they do is that once you add them here, they also come with default values for all our different channels here. And we can also change them around if we want. So for instance, if I crank the roughness up here and change the color, you will see how that thing here changes all the way from super glossy to really matte. So technically we could just take that material here and tweak those parameters around until it resembles any of the different materials that are on the grenade. Or we could make use of any of these materials here that Substance Painter ships with. So for instance, if I click on platinum, it will then just switch over here to exactly that. Like the name suggests, it's a fill layer. And within those materials here that are now active here on our fill layer to work with, we have a few parameters usually that we can then also change around. So for instance, if I want to add more dirt here on that thing, I'm just going to crank that up. And I can also, for instance, lower the surface imperfections here. Just bring that down. And that makes it very easy to change an existing material to a look that we really want to have on our object by just picking anything out of this pool of default materials that it comes with here. So now we learned what the layers do and what the fill layers do. And that leaves us with the smart materials here that I also want to quickly cover. So you can access them either by clicking on that button here, which will then open that drop-down menu, or you could switch over here to the Smart Material tab and then just take any of these smart materials and drag them on top of our layer hierarchy. And usually the difference between those smart materials and the default materials are that the smart materials already come with a lot of wear and tear, as you can see. So the wear and tear, it looks at our textures that we baked out here earlier, our support maps, and based on, like, for instance, the curvature information, which is very important, it will then just put some chipping here along these edges. And that also explains why those smart materials pop up in a folder, because they come with all these different layer styles here that are bundled together, such as in that case here, the dust and the coating. If we flip through them, you will see how it's actually been built. Like at the base, we have the metal, and then we have the actual paint on top, and then the dust here. And that also makes it very easy for us to change the look of the particular smart material. So for instance, since we're already working here on the dust layer, we can then just click on this here and change the color of the actual dirt. So for instance, here a bit more bright looking. And here on the mask, we have our actual generator that we can also change around. So for instance, the level, it also looks at our curvature as everything. And based on that, just change the actual amount. You can also change the contrast here. So we have a whole lot of different options to pick from to give this an individual look. And let's say we really like that particular look here. We could then just double click that, call it steel scratched desert dirt. And then if you right click it, you could say create smart material. And if we would confirm that, it would then pop up here in our smart material tab, and we could just reapply it to any other object that we bring into Substance Painter. And now it's time to actually start texturing our grenade. So what I'm gonna do is just delete everything here. Just gonna leave the ambient occlusion here. And I will then create a fill layer. And within that fill layer, I want to create a material here from scratch basically. I won't be making use of any smart material for it. So for that, let's have a look here at our reference image, and I just want to show you one thing that's also a really cool feature of Substance Painter. If you go onto your fill layer and you will click on the base color, you can drag this thing out to anywhere in the viewport, but also outside of it. So in that case, I'm just gonna drag it over here to the reference image, and we get already exactly the kind of color that we want to have for it. Sometimes it might still require a little bit of adjustment then. So for instance, that thing here looks a little too bright still for me. So I will just bring down the brightness a bit here, around there. And with that fill layer selected here in our layer stack, I'm gonna press Ctrl and G, which will automatically put it into a folder. So I'm gonna call that here the body. And as you can see, we don't want to have all our elements to have that particular paint on it. So I'm going ahead by creating a mask, a black mask. And I will then click here on the geometry decal, and with white color selected over here, and element mode, or in 3D Max that would basically equal the element mode, I will click here on that thing, mesh selection, and just select this particular piece here. So that leaves us with this particular selection. And if you look at the reference image, I really don't want to have that thing here in that green paint as well, because that's supposed to be red plastic or something like that. So in that case, I can go back here to the geometry decal. Actually, it's over here. And turn that thing back to black. Go onto UV. And then basically just select that thing, which will deselect it. And now we're really left with the particular piece that we want to be working on first. So within that folder that we created here, we can then just add another fill layer. And I want to be working here on this grainy look. So in order to do that, I'm going to use that particular fill layer. I'm going to disable the color on it. and I'm gonna work with another black mask, and I will add a so-called fill here. And what that fill enables us to do is to slide over here to the Procedural Texture tab, and we can then add a specific procedural texture. I already made some tests earlier, so I know that the moisture noise works pretty well. And I'm just gonna drag it here onto the grayscale. And the reason why we don't see anything here on it yet is that we have to go back to the actual material itself and adjust the height, which is currently stuck at 0, so it won't show anything. So if we slide that all the way over here, for instance, we start seeing some actual bump effect here, and that's exactly what we want. So that basically would be the big bump here, but we also want to have a little bit of this micro noise, like that little stuff here. So I'm gonna just make a copy of this, and I will then go over to the fill and use what we already have and just make it way smaller. So I'm gonna tile it 25 times all over the place here. And that results in a pretty ugly look. So what that means exactly is that we have to adjust our height again on the actual material. So I'm gonna slide that back down, maybe somewhere around here. And that means that we now have a pretty okay start base here for our actual body of the grenade. And we can then take it, duplicate that folder of the body and call it spoon. Right click on the black mask and say add black mask, which will basically override it. And now we can then just do the same thing here with the geometry decal. Go into our element mode and select our spoon here. Now, if I look at my reference images, I don't want to have this heavy cast iron look on it for the spoon. So in that case, I'm just gonna delete these two fill layers here. And that leaves us with just the painted metal look, and we can adjust it to look more like the actual spoon on the reference image. And for that, what I'm going to do is create another fill layer again. And I will make use of some of our steel materials here. The bumped steel looks pretty okay. And I will add another black mask on it. And onto that black mask, I'm going to add a generator, such as the edge damages here. Now, if it comes on like that, it obviously doesn't look quite right yet. So what that means is that we have to adjust our height information here on that actual material that we're using. And for that, I'm going to bring down the height range all the way to maybe around here. Now it still doesn't look quite right. It looks like the paint is in the actual metal, and we actually want it to be the other way around, where it's on top. So in that case, I'm gonna adjust the height position here. Maybe 4.8, or actually 4.9 looks already good enough. I see a little bit of a bump, but really minimalistic, and that is exactly the kind of look that I want for that here. Now, as for the actual amount of the grunge, we could also change those values here around a bit. For instance, I'm gonna bring down the actual level and increase the contrast and also the actual damage intensity. So now it looks less generic here on the sides. Another thing that I want to add is a different kind of color paint here on that end piece here of the spoon. So in that case, I'm just going to take what we already have here, our color layer, and I'm going to make a copy of it and just bring down the color so that we have it somewhere around here. And in combination with the black mask in our geometry decal here, we can then just zoom in and select those target areas that we want to have masked into that black paint here. And that looks already pretty much like it. Maybe it doesn't go all the way up to here, so I'm just gonna go back and deselect these areas, and now it looks pretty okay. Now, as for the actual amount of the grunge, I also want to adjust these values a bit, bring it down a bit so that it looks less generic here on the sides. So I'm going to put that down around 0.7, and I want to increase the contrast on it a bit, and also the actual damage intensity. Bring that to 0.5. And as for this part here of the spoon, if I'm having a look at the reference images, we want to have it painted black there. So I'm just gonna take the actual layer here, gonna press Ctrl D and make a copy of it and change the color to that particular black. So I'm gonna take out the saturation and bring that slider down here. And now we can also just create another black mask on it and work here in combination with the geometry decal again. But this time I'm going to select the polygon selection here, and then with the white selected here, I zoom in and I just select all these areas that we want to have in that mask around here. And actually it doesn't seem to go all the way up here, so I'm just going to deselect this particular set of faces here again. So switch over here to black color and just do that here. So that looks more like our reference image now. And speaking of our reference image, we also have some yellow paint here on top of the body of the grenade. So I'm just gonna do the same thing here again, copy our actual paint layer and switch it over to a yellow tone here. Maybe a bit of an orange touch in there. And I will add a black mask again and then work here with our geometry decal again. Now in that case we don't have an edge loop going somewhere through here where we actually want that paint to end. So in that case what I'm going to do is press F3, and that will bring us here into Substance Painter's 2D mode. And with our mask selected here and our brush mode, I'm just going to adjust these parameters here of the brush. And I also want to change our size space here over to texture, and the alignment I'm going to put it to UV. So now with that brush here, see if all the parameters are set up correct. I'm just going to click over here, and then with Ctrl and Shift pressed, you can draw a straight line over here to the other side and take away from that paint here. So let's press F2 and see if that looks alright. And in fact it does. I'm just gonna change it to another brush here and make this gradient here a little bit less obvious. So I'm gonna switch over here to, for instance, that one. Zoom out and just do the same thing here. I'm gonna Ctrl and Shift. And now we have a bit of this chipping here, which looks like it's been more spray painted on it. And at that point, it might be a good idea to switch over here to our actual final output resolution and have a look at the grenade so far in 4K and see if we still like it. So now it actually switched over. And I find that a bit too noisy here, like this micro noise that we added onto our body earlier. I'm gonna go over here to the layer where we have it, and I want to take a bit away from the height. So I'm gonna bring it back a bit more to the 0 region, not entirely. And now it looks a bit less noisy, so I'm actually happier with that. And also it reveals that these layers here look still a little bit weird to me. So what I want to do is take our actual yellow paint, go back into our 2D mode, and take that brush here again. Gonna make it smaller. And I want to just do the same thing again that we just did and try to minimize that gradient that we have there. Let me go over here. Yeah, now it looks a bit better to me. All right, let's go back here. And another thing that we can do on that yellow paint is to change the roughness a bit. So I'm gonna bring it down. Since we're working in 4K right now, it always takes a bit to load. So for instance, if I take that all the way down here, the roughness, you can see what's happening. It looks quite a bit different. I don't want it to be all the way down though, so I'm gonna put it somewhere around here. And I also want to increase the height a bit on it. So I'm gonna put the height somewhere around just a subtle amount above 0, so that it looks like there's an actual coat of color here, like some actual spray that's been done there. So in that case, I'm pretty happy here with the looks of the final resolution. So I'm just gonna bring it back here to 2K again, just so that it's a bit faster to work with. And as the next thing, I'm going to continue to add more materials to our remaining elements. So as a first thing, I want to be adding that red plastic ring that we have here in between our fuse and the body. So I will do the same thing as usual. I create a new folder and I want to add a black mask on it. And in that folder, I'm gonna create a new fill layer. Actually, let's drag it in here. And I want that fill layer to be something plastic here. So I'm gonna put it to uniform plastic here. And then on our mask, I'm going over to geometry decal and put it to the UV here. And we unwrapped that thing earlier as one stripe. So I'm just gonna click it and that immediately takes it and switches it over to this element. And I'm just gonna call it here red stripe and obviously change the color. So I'm gonna put it to some dark red. Somewhere around here looks fine. And next I'm going to continue with the actual fuse here and all our other metal parts, which look to me like they are pretty much the same kind of metal. So I'm just going to create another folder, call it metal elements, and create another fill layer, which I will then use the bumped metal. Let's see where it's hiding. Steel bumped actually is what I want. And now I just forgot the mask here. So again, I'm adding a black mask. Go over here to geometry decal. And in that case, I want to have the mesh selection here. So now it's just a matter of selecting the particular elements, and that gives us our metal here. I will leave the metal as it is, And I will continue here with the text that already shines through our normal map. And I'm going to create another folder, add a fill layer, and just bring it down to some dark tone. And now I will create not a black mask as usual, but a mask with a color selection. So what the color selection actually does is that it's based on our ID mask, which we rendered out earlier. And it's another way of selecting our different elements here, including even the floater geometry that we baked out earlier. You can just click here on the text, and that will make a selection exactly here for this specific area. One thing about it is that it looks a little pixelated. So in that case, what we can do is to change the intensity here. I'm gonna bring down that hardness amount and put the tolerance up a subtle amount around here. And also what I want to do is to change the actual roughness that we have on that text. So around here looks better to me. And also what I want to do is add a bit of a height information on it. Just a subtle amount so that it actually looks like it's been stamped on there. And another thing that I want to do on it is to add a bit of grunge. So I will add a black mask, which will make it disappear. And in combination with our generators here, we will make it reappear, but with some chiseled look to it. So we'll go over and pick the dirt here. And let's see how we tweak these values. I'm gonna bring up the overall level and also the contrast. And now it looks like it has a bit more of wear on that whole thing here. And speaking of wear, I'm going ahead by making a proper pass of it now, wear and tear. It's the perfect time for it because we assign all our base materials here to the specific elements. And we already have some wear and tear in certain areas here, but it's time to add more to it. So we'll create another folder. And I'm gonna start with the body and the spoon. Body/spoon. And I will create another fill layer here into that folder. I'm gonna use the metal dumpster. Gonna mask that folder. Use our mesh selection here. And I also want to bring up the tiling amount here, subtle amount, 1.5. And now I will create another black mask here onto that and work with our generators. And I'm gonna use the metal edge wear first. This one here. And that already looks pretty good. However, it doesn't look as if the height information is quite right. It's a bit too strong. So I will go over here to the actual material, scroll down, and surprisingly, there's no height information here on that material. Maybe they forgot to expose these values, I don't know. But there's a way to do it anyway by just going over here to the height. And then we can just bring down these parameters here. Around 25 looks good. And I will go back here and add another generator on top of that, which is the selective dirt is what I want to use for it. This one here. Gonna crank that up to 1 and put it to screen mode here. So now it works in combination with the generator that we have below. And that's exactly the look that I want to have here on that. Now, since this red ring here is part of our actual body as one element, it got a bit too much of this wear and tear here. You can barely see the red anymore. So what that means in particular is I'm going back here into the UV mode and I will switch that over to black and then just click on our mask here. And I will add some more wear and tear here on the whole fuse in combination with that red ring as the next thing now. So I'm gonna just call this here wear and tear fuse. And as usual, I'm gonna drop a fill layer into that. Add a black mask here to the folder and then gonna select the fuse and also that red ring here. So these are the next two things that I want to add some wear and tear to. And in that case, I want it to be the uniform black dirt on the material. I'm gonna make it brighter and add another mask to it here. And I'm gonna work with the dust generator first. And before I go ahead and tweak these particular values here, I actually want to go back to our metal elements that we created earlier, which is the material for that metal itself. And in that material, we already have a few parameters that we could also adjust and already add a bit of this dirt to it here. Just gonna bring that up around 3.2 here. Scratches will make that pop out a bit more. And back to that dust generator here, I want to crank it all the way up to 1. The noise opacity, so that we get that grainy look here as if it's actually been hit by some sand particles. And also bring up the overall level by only 0.2. And I'm gonna go ahead here and add a few more generators to it. I'm gonna have the paint wear, put it to screen so that it actually blends. Have a slight increase of variation on it. And I'm gonna add another generator, which is the dirt here, the edge dirt. Also gonna increase the variation on it. And what I also want to do is actually bring that color down again here to a more darker tone so that we get some more contrast here in those edges, which I find suits it better here on that fuse. Another thing that we can do here on that dust layer is to enable the height information. It has been unchecked by default on that material. So clicking it will give us back here that height slider. And if we make use of that, we can then just pop out this bump information a bit more. Don't want to have it very strong though, just a subtle amount. And another thing that I want to do is to create another uniform black material in here. Gonna add a black mask to it. And the one thing that I want is to not affect the metal. So what that does is it will just give us a bit more of these black patches. I'm gonna use the mask builder for it. And I will lower the intensity as usual. Bring the level down. And that just gives it a bit more of some oil film look, like some of these areas have actually been affected by something else that is not that dust. Just gonna change the color, make it a little less dark. And as for our spoon, the more I look at that here, the more I find that that bump is too strong on it. So I will go back here to that particular layer and I will just go over here to the height again and bring that down here to around 5, which still leaves us with a little bit of that bump, but not as unrealistic as before. Now this action that I just applied here on the spoon, where I took away from the height, also affected the body of the grenade, which I actually didn't want. So in that case, I'm just gonna make a copy here of that folder, and I'm gonna separate out the spoon from the body. So first of all, I'm just gonna rename that here properly. That's gonna be our spoon, and that's gonna be the body here. And that just means that I'm gonna disable this one here first, not to get confused. And with our geometry decal and black, I'm gonna deselect the grenade itself here, the body. And that leaves us only with the spoon here for this particular folder. So back to that thing, I'm gonna do the same thing just on the spoon, and then I can go into the height information again and bring these values up again so that we have some actual chisel here, which in case of the grenade I definitely want to have. Now we put quite a bit of work here into the wear and tear of the fuse, and I just want to make a copy of that and call that rings. Gonna overwrite that mask here and pick these ring elements here with a mesh select. And that didn't work because this thing has to be back to white. And now I'm gonna see what I can reuse. So first of all, I want to throw out that thing here that affects the metal. And secondly, I think that the edge dirt is too strong on it. But other than that, we can keep the rest. Like this gives some nice little extra details here. And looks overall more realistic here. We also have a bit of this oil film here, thanks to the paint wear. And I'm gonna do the same thing here on the body itself. So since we already have a wear and tear folder for it, I'm gonna call that here wear and tear dust body. Also overwrite it and pick the actual grenade here. And let's see if we want to keep that. Actually, not too bad. Gives a bit more contrast to it, but it might be a bit too noisy. So I'm just gonna, actually I want to do the opposite. I want to bring that down here and put the contrast up, which puts it only in selected places then. And as for these modifiers here, I guess I keep calling them modifiers because I'm working in Max so often. As for these generators, the paint wear, maybe we can put a bit more variation in there. And let's see if we can do something here on the color itself. Gonna put it up a little bit more. And at that point, we're almost done here with the grenade. Really starting to like the look of it. I just want to add even more stuff here to the fuse. So I'm gonna go back here to our folder. And I want to drop a dust particle smart material into it. It's gonna drag and drop into the fuse folder. And what that does is it adds even more of this little micro noise, these particles. And in particular, what we can do with it is to change those individual colors around a bit. Give each one of these 3 layers here a bit of a different appearance. just to make it a bit more random. And actually here for that dirt, I'm gonna have it less yellow looking. I'm gonna take out the saturation a slight amount. And let's see what else we got. I guess I really can't make my mind up here about the height on that spoon, so terribly sorry, but I'm just gonna go back here into the height once more and bring it up around 15. So we have a bit more of this grunge there. And that leaves us with not a whole lot. I'm just gonna add a final touch to it, literally. And what that means exactly is that I'm gonna create a fill layer here on top of everything. Gonna call it fingerprints. And I want to disable the color on it. Gonna make use here of the roughness, put it to 0.1. Add a black mask and go over here to our fingerprint brush. And on that guy, I want to be working here with white so we can actually affect our mask. And I also want to put the size space to viewport and turn the jitter amounts down. Gonna leave a little bit of it. And other than that, I'm just gonna put that here to a reasonable size and also turn the shadows off. It's getting a little slow. And now I can just paint here onto that mask and add a few fingerprints. Maybe one down here. And one more here at the end of the spoon, depending on which angle you look at it. And also that text could be a little less matte. I'm gonna make it a bit more glossy again. So that it doesn't stand out so extremely over there. And that concludes it for our grenade modeling and texturing tutorial. I hope you liked it and that you learned a few new things on the way. I would be glad if you support me by sharing this video on your social network groups or any other place on the web you think would fit for it. For my latest news, feel free to follow me on ArtStation, Facebook, Twitter, as well as my YouTube channel here. My next tutorial is almost done and will be up for sale very shortly. And in this one we will be taking an in-depth look at creating an AK assault rifle from scratch. Every single step is covered with commentary again, and I will share a ton of important techniques and ways that will help you become an efficient hard surface modeler. So have your 3D Max and mouse ready, and I hope to see you there again.